The train station felt like any other, quiet, drizzly, cloaked in autumn mist. The station was beginning to hum with the steady rhythm of the city coming alive, but Emma stood there on platform 9, feeling somehow outside it all. She was lost in thought, a novel open in her hands but her mind wandering far beyond its pages. She had been stuck in a loop, a predictable rotation of work and home, peppered with books and weekend phone calls to her family. In her mid-30s, she felt she'd somehow become a bystander in her own life, managing pages, schedules, and manuscripts, but not living as she once had dreamed. Emma had always been a romantic at heart. As a child, she'd spent hours making up stories about imaginary places and mysterious strangers, recording them in a notebook she kept under her bed. Her mother used to tease her for being in another world, but Emma loved that world. It was hers, and she never wanted to leave it. Over time, though, life's small demands chipped away at her dreamer's heart. School, work, bills, routines, they pulled her from that magic realm into the often gray, practical world of adulthood. The stories that once thrilled her had become an endless series of red-marked manuscripts. As the train approached that misty morning, a figure caught her eye across the platform. He was tall, leaning against one of the station columns with a book in hand and his dark green coat loose around his shoulders. The coat looked a little too big, giving him a whimsical air, and a worn navy beanie sat atop a mess of unruly brown curls. His face was partially hidden by the morning mist, but Emma could make out a small, thoughtful smile as he read, occasionally looking up as though he were waiting for someone or something. She wondered what kind of person he was, then chastised herself for staring. And just as she was about to look away, he glanced up, locking eyes with her. There was a glint of recognition, as if he, too, had been hoping to find her there. His smile widened ever so slightly, and he gave her a small nod. Emma's heart skipped. She quickly looked down, her cheeks flushing. She felt silly, like a teenager with a crush. Yet, as the train doors opened, she dared one last glance back at him. He was still watching her, his expression warm and curious. The next morning, he was there again. This time, he looked up as soon as she arrived, and a knowing smile passed between them. This wordless connection continued for days, each one building anticipation until Emma couldn't help but wonder who he was and why he kept showing up at the same time, standing in the same spot across the platform. She imagined dozens of stories for him. Perhaps he was a painter, inspired by the colors of the city, or a writer, here to people watch and take mental notes, maybe even a traveler, someone who wandered the world freely. And then, on the 5th day, fate seemed to intervene. As a gust of wind swept through the station, her scarf flew off her shoulders and across the platform, landing at his feet. Startled, she watched as he picked it up, carefully gathering the ends in his hands. He looked over to her with a smile, then crossed the platform to return it. "Excuse me," he said, holding the scarf out. "I think this belongs to you." Emma could barely speak, caught off guard by the warmth in his voice. "Thank you," she managed, feeling a bit silly. "I didn't realize it was so windy." "Wind has a way of surprising people," he said, his expression softening. "I'm Oliver, by the way. I think we've, well, noticed each other." Emma's cheeks flushed, but she smiled, feeling her shyness ease. "I'm Emma." She accepted the scarf, their fingers brushing briefly as he handed it over. His hand was cold but gentle, as though he had all the time in the world for this moment. Their conversation grew as easily as though they'd known each other for years. Oliver had a way of speaking that put Emma at ease. She learned he was a photographer who had recently moved to the city, enchanted by its hidden pockets of charm and beauty. His work took him to interesting, sometimes unusual places, old libraries, abandoned theaters, riversides, and city parks just as the sun was setting. "What about you?" he asked, genuinely interested. "I get the sense you're the kind of person who loves stories." Emma chuckled. "I work as an editor for a small publishing house, so, yes, I read a lot. Maybe too much. She hesitated, then added, but sometimes, reading isn't quite the same as dreaming. Oliver nodded as if he understood completely. Editing is an art, though, he said. You bring stories to life by giving them shape. I'd say that's dreaming, too. They continued talking, and soon enough, they'd missed their respective trains. Not that either of them cared, they were too wrapped up in discovering each other. Oliver suggested they grab a coffee, and Emma, almost surprised by her own boldness, agreed. The cafe around the corner was a small, family-owned place with dim lighting and booths tucked away in corners. They found a spot by the window, and Emma noticed how Oliver seemed to know the place as though he'd been there countless times. He ordered a plain black coffee, while she added too much cream and just a bit too much sugar, a habit she'd had since college. He teased her about it, and she teased him about his serious coffee order. It was strange, Emma thought, she'd known Oliver less than an hour, yet there was a warmth between them that felt like an old friendship. Over the following days, Emma's life took on a new rhythm. She and Oliver would meet in the mornings at the train station, sometimes taking separate trains and promising to meet later, other times riding together if they could, quietly chatting or simply sitting side by side. Their days turned into routines filled with secret rendezvous and long walks. Oliver had a way of finding beauty in ordinary things, and through his eyes, Emma found herself rediscovering the city she thought she'd known so well. With him, she felt a spark reignite within her, a joy that had long been buried under the weight of habit and duty. On weekends, they explored. Oliver led her to forgotten corners of the city, a mural hidden in an alley, a bookshop that sold postcards from cities around the world, a quiet park where the flowers bloomed even as autumn turned to winter. One weekend, he brought his camera along and snapped pictures of her as they walked. She laughed, half embarrassed, but he reassured her, saying he wanted to capture this moment. Later, when they reviewed the photos, she was surprised to see herself look so happy. Winter settled over the city, bringing snow that blanketed the streets and transformed the familiar landscape into something dreamlike. On one particular night, Oliver invited her to his favorite lookout, a hill that offered a breathtaking view of the skyline. They trudged through the snow, their breaths misting in the cold air, and when they reached the top, the city lights sparkled below like stars. Oliver took her hands, warming them in his, and his gaze softened as he spoke. "Emma, I always thought I'd spend my life wandering, searching for something, maybe someone. But with you, I feel like I've found a place to rest." Her heart fluttered, and she realized she felt the same. They'd both been wandering, perhaps in different ways, but they'd been brought together by some invisible force, a gentle reminder that life's beauty often lay hidden, waiting to be uncovered. Their relationship blossomed, deepening with each passing day. Oliver opened her heart to adventure, urging her to embrace spontaneity, while Emma grounded him, giving him a sense of stability he'd never known. Together, they built a life rich with simple, joyful moments, coffee in the mornings, walks in the evening, books shared on rainy days. As the seasons passed, Emma and Oliver grew inseparable, their love carrying them through the ebbs and flows of life. They knew, even in moments of silence, that they had found something rare and beautiful, a love that was neither fleeting nor fragile, but strong and true. And so, Emma and Oliver's journey continued, filled with laughter, adventure, and the quiet certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be, together.